Hey guys, welcome to the final episode of my Bravely Default 2 playthrough. If you had been following along week to week, I apologize for the delay in getting this out. I simply wanted to put together all my thoughts in a semi-cohesive way and present them in a video I'll be proud of. So without further ado, let's dive in. The very first episode I uploaded was on September 9th, 2022, and the series consists of 53 episodes, not including this one. This was my second blind playthrough ever recorded, with Digimon Story being the first one. This video will contain my final thoughts after this year-long adventure and will be split up into the following categories. Number 1, art style and graphics. Number 2, music. Number 3, gameplay. And number 4, story. Real quick, just a heads up, since I played and am a fan of the previous titles, Bravely Default and Bravely Second and Layer, I can't resist drawing comparisons between this latest title and those that came before it. There are honestly a ton of similarities, so forgive me if that gets annoying. So beginning with number 1, my thoughts on the art style of the game. There is an almost chibi-like style which was in the previous games. Characters' heads seem kind of large while their hands and feet are small and stubby. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think it makes the game stand apart from other JRPGs and gives it its own unique charm. It works for this game, especially when you look at the towns and regions. Everything almost looks like a painting, and there's so much detail, which you know the developers and artists want you to see, because all it takes is a few seconds of standing idle in a town for the camera to automatically zoom out and give you the grand sense of scale of the place you're standing in. At the same time, towns didn't feel overwhelming because each one had its handful of buildings, inns, and shops you could enter and explore. The only exception to this was probably Wiswald, because it had multiple locations within it that you had to wait through a load screen to get to. Speaking of which, it would have been nice to have a load screen that was a bit more creative, especially when you encounter so many. But back to the art style. Each town and region felt unique, and towns like Wiswald and Savalon incorporated the effects that their respective crystals had on their geography. Even towns that weren't ravaged by a crystal had something that made them special. From the architecture, to the lighting, to the style of dress of the NPCs, to the weather, each town had a story to tell. The user interface was neat and organized well, and it felt smooth to have the option of switching between characters on a certain page, like the abilities, equipment, or job class page, or have the option of switching between those pages for one character. Lastly, I liked the designs of each job class. Not all of them were winners, but it was still cool to see variations of the same theme on each character. Now for music and sound. I really can't say enough about the music and how much depth and memorability it adds to the game. You may have noticed in the playthrough that each region's overworld had a distinct arrangement of the main theme. Then there were unique themes for each city and town, complete with an accompanying accent for its residents, which brings me to the voice acting. I loved the accents of each area. And from what I could pick up, Wiswald was Scottish. In Halcyonia, you had royals and nobles who spoke in a proper British accent, like an upper class kind of accent, while commoners spoke with a Cockney accent. And in Durno, seemed Irish. And for Rheimdall, I'm not quite sure, some type of European accent. As for Holograd, it seemed like it was Spanish or some other type of European culture, I don't know. I read somewhere that the voice actor for Adam is of Russian descent, so I don't know, maybe that points us in the right direction. But I enjoyed the distinct accents because it made it so that you could hear what an NPC sounds like and immediately guess what town they might hail from. That's the kind of world building I appreciate. It feels solid. I think back to Galahad, who is in Wiswald when you first meet him. I found it strange that he didn't talk quite like the other Wiswalders. If I was smarter, I would have noticed once we landed in Rheimdall that the people of this town all kind of talk like Galahad, and once we got the big reveal that Gladys and Galahad are related, brother and sister, it clicked for me, and it made me appreciate the behind-the-scenes weaving of character stories. Just like in real life, people have mutual friends and connections, and you never know which one of your friends is friends with or related to another friend, if that makes any sense. As for the voice acting of the main characters, I feel like they were all very strong and put on great performances. Similar to previous Bravely Defaults, there's a certain kind of quality to the recording where all the S's sound kind of fuzzy, or like the mic level is peaking. I'm not sure why that is, and I even did a quick search to see if anyone else notices it, but all I found was people either praising or complaining about the quality of the voice actors' performances, not the actual quality. People seem pretty split about that, by the way. You either love it or hate it. As for the bad guys, They were some of the most angriest, vilest, cringiest the world has ever seen. I'm just kidding. It really does make me think about how when a show makes you really dislike a character, it's usually because they did a good job writing that character, and I do feel like the actors did a great job with their performances. Each of our main characters is paired with an instrument that is brought to the forefront during their special. You get a wonderful example of how they each play nicely together during the end credits, where I was blown away by how seamlessly each character's theme flowed into each other. This was an idea also borrowed from the previous titles, and I think it really serves to set each character apart. There are certain characteristics to music genres as well as individual instruments. They just evoke certain emotions and associations, so when you combine that with the distinct personalities of each main character, it creates something so memorable. Yahar! Seth's theme features a stringed instrument. I can't tell if it's a classical guitar or mandolin, but it's awesome, and it starts out fast and wild. It's exotic, upbeat, but think of his story. A sailor having just been shipwrecked. He's revived by one of the 4 crystals. He washes onto the shores of an unknown region and decides to jump in and aid a princess and her ward without a kingdom whom he just met, knowing that their task is monumentous. To me, that speaks volumes about his bravery, his noble heart, and his sense for adventure. And the more you get to know him, the more loyal and pure-hearted you learn he is, and you learn how fierce he can be when he protects his friends. He understands the responsibility on his shoulders as someone from the other side, and he faithfully serves. As for Gloria's theme, to me, it's very regal and beautiful. I hear piano and perhaps harp as the main instruments. She's royalty, so there's an elegance to it, and her personality throughout the game speaks to her sense of duty. Her mission is clear, and she's locked into her goal, despite her immense suffering, which would have crippled anyone else. At certain points in the story, she even explains that a big driving force for her continuing onward is her desire to not have what happened to her kingdom happen to anyone else. By the way, how great is it that the developers, or whoever was in charge, decided not to have any music when you finally visit Musa? It's empty, eerie, solemn, and you finally see in front of you the grief that Gloria had been carrying all this time. Elvis is such a son of a gun, and all I can hear in my head when I think of him is ha ha ha, and other hilarious remarks like, "Alrighty then, we'll not even break a sweat with this one." He's so carefree and even careless sometimes, but he has a deep determination to help his friends and fight for them. You see this at various points, like when he is so enraged at Foley for all the pain she caused his hometown and his old friends. He is so livid that he can't help but experience calmness. He's like, "Nope, you're done, right now." And that's what activated the crystal's power for him too. I even forgot several times that he's a scholar of noble descent, because he definitely doesn't act like it. It's this fantastic blend of personal qualities that makes Elvis's theme so fitting. There's a swing to it, it's lively, jazzy, led by what I think is a clarinet. It's sly and unique, just like Elvis, but you can't help but love him. Adele's theme is probably my favorite, because the horns sound so good. The second time around on the intro, you hear them harmonizing with each other, and then the main horn comes in through nice and strong while the rest of the instruments take a back seat. The way I feel it speaks to her personality is because when I think of brass instruments, they definitely stand out among the instruments, and by that I mean they always cut through the mix. They can be brash at times, but there is a refined quality to them. You can't help but notice these instruments, and it's the same with Adele. She can be blunt and straight to the point. She is described as a mercenary, for crying out loud, but her loyalty and care for those she loves is second to none. This causes her to leave her fairy home to track down her sister Edna, knowing that she may not be welcome back after living among humans. After learning of the evils her sister committed, she resolves to do the right thing and help her friends defeat Edna for the sake of the human and fairy world. Despite how brash she can be and how much of a hard time she gives Elvis, you know there's a sweetness to her, and is the kind of person you'd always want in your corner. Also, she crits really hard. If I knew more about music, I could probably elaborate more, but these are just some of my thoughts and feelings at the moment. Alright, so now for gameplay. Keep in mind, I played on the normal difficulty. I liked the job class system, though it became pretty clear that certain jobs were way more overpowered than others. I feel like one which has always received the short end of the stick in this series has been the Ranger. You would think a class that's specifically built around exposing enemy weaknesses would be better, but no. Some classes like the Salve Maker I think had really good potential, but they take a lot of setting up or their abilities cost too much. In the end, I think my big takeaway with the class system is that jobs are good for different things at different times in the game. Early on, when you don't have access to any MP regeneration abilities or spells, you have to think very carefully about your MP usage, and you might lean on physical attackers a little more. Of course, towards the end, when everything is available to you, you're looking for the most efficient way to deal big damage with the least amount of setup, especially if you're farming mobs. You're looking for strong AoEs that can carry over from fight to fight. However, in a boss fight, where they have hundreds of thousands of HP, you'll run out of resources before you take out the boss, and you might find yourself at -3 BP on all your characters, just getting absolutely wrecked by the boss and their minions, taking chunks out of your health. You may need to slow down and prioritize survivability, or have a healthy mix of both DPS and defense. Godspeed Strike still wrecks everything, but I only decided to go that route later in game, then abandoned it for the last area. But I loved having synergy with job classes and then having characters complement each other on the battlefield with those abilities. The booster buns were a really cool way for players of this game to build each character for exactly the role they want in their party. The addition of weight as a factor when equipping weapons and armor, that was pretty cool. You can't just get the best late game weapon or armor through some exploit and use it early on without any consequences. It was annoying at times, but it was clever of them to use weight as a stat and even be the determining factor of how much damage you deal for certain moves. I wish I would have had the time to experiment with heavy builds like this. I don't think it would have dealt tens of thousands of damage, but who can say for sure? Speaking of which, there was a move that did more damage the more in-game hours you had racked up. I wonder if anyone has tried getting the max amount of hours, maybe like 999 hours, that's like 40 days or something, and then taking a look at how much damage it does, because it was not worth it for me. It did like 4,000 or 5,000 damage if I recall correctly. Also, if I recall correctly, one or both of the previous games had presets you could set up for job class, abilities, and equipment combinations. That would have been so nice for this game, especially considering how I had a different loadout for each thing I was doing, whether that was farming JP, booster buns, or progressing the story with my main team. Swapping back and forth every time I wanted to do something else was really time consuming and would have been a nice quality of life feature. For the AFK voyaging system, it was a cool idea, but the online functionality never worked for me. I think the switch goes to sleep, and when it does, the Wi-Fi connectivity stops. At least that's what happens to me on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Even if I press home and remain on that page for too long, if I enter the game again, I get a message that says I've been disconnected. But the AFK Voyage feature is specifically supposed to work while your game is asleep, so I'm confused. Either way, it was nice to get rewards for not playing, even if they were from bots/made-up NPCs. At one point I thought I had a game-breaking amount of JP and XP orbs, but then I hit a few difficulty spikes and realized I needed to use all of the orbs I had, and then when we started farming the job class portals, we started raking in the giant JP orbs at a really fast rate. Lastly, open world travel would have been so sweet, and I honestly kept hoping that I would soon unlock it throughout my playthrough. I kept expecting Gwillem to be our mount, and that we would fly him to places we couldn't reach before. It's a common trope in JRPGs that you unlock free travel at some point, and it even happened this way in the previous Bravely Default titles. I guess this one is just different. But you know, airships exist. I mean, Adam crashed his, but I guess it only took off in the first place because of the air crystal's power. And now for the story. We begin our journey seeing our main hero underwater being spoken to by a mysterious light. We get to choose his name and are then washed up onto the beach. It's interesting how this is the only character whose name you get to choose, and I have to think it's because the developers want us to insert ourselves into the story. We too are like foreigners from another world, about to be thrown into the chaos of this continent, and like Seth, we're going to grow to love our new friends and join with them to make things right. I know I already went through a bit of each of the main characters' backstories in the section about music, but I can't speak enough about how unique each of them are, yet at the same time, they're interconnected and it makes sense where the party is going to next. During this entire playthrough, even though there would be weeks where I hadn't played at all, I never once entered the game and thought, wait, what am I doing? It was always so clear because the story just naturally took us there. I mean, at first, it kind of was just go to the next town, duh, whatever, but once you visited them all, you're still like, we need to help the towns recover from Holograd's invasion, or we need to look for the entrance to Magmel, or we're looking for clues on how to beat the Knight's Nexus without Gloria sacrificing her life. Especially if you're like me and you like doing all the quests, you're going to visit all the towns multiple times, but each time you visit, the side quests further your understanding of the lore for each town and the people who live there. Speaking of which, the the side quests weren't all boring fetch quests. Maybe a little annoying having to fast travel between towns, but a lot of times this was because NPCs were friends and it was always wholesome. Oftentimes, after significant side quests or after important story beats, a party chat notification would come up. I absolutely loved these throughout the whole playthrough. These interactions made characters come to life even more for me. You got to learn a little bit more about your party after each chat. Sometimes they were heavy, like Gloria reflecting on the loss of her kingdom. Sometimes they were light and funny, like Adele insisting that she wants to try a region's delicacy, silver smelt, which everyone knows is super gross. No matter the tone, each chat was wholesome and cemented the fact that this team was a family and they had each other's backs. Also, I just realized that this is one of the few times in a JRPG I've seen where they didn't use the trope where the party gets split up and then they come back together at some point. Interesting. Now, before I get to the end of the story and my thoughts, I wanted to cover the villains again real quick because I could see that the writers tried to give each villain some sort of backstory to make them not so one-dimensional, but certain villains like Foley, Castor, Vigentio, and Helio were definitely despicable. Foley was a spoiled rich kid who didn't get attention from her parents, so she murders men and women, leaving behind orphans just to use their blood for paint? Yeah, no, sorry, get crushed. I will say it was kind of cute, the story that Dag and Selena had going at the same time as our main characters, but then I remembered that they kidnapped a child, and even if they were only pretending to be willing to hurt him, Dag did sucker punch Sir Sloan, and you don't mess with our beloved Sir Sloan. That's why I found Adam so annoying too. Not only did he kill Sir Sloan, but he also killed the Lord of Dragons, who had a really cool voice. You only get a little bit of backstory from Adam, by the way, and if I recall correctly, it's just that he was the son of the previous Lord Commander of Holograd, who was not as violent and bent on controlling everything as Adam was. It seemed that Adam's goal was to prevent wars from happening by forcing peace on all the kingdoms and towns he conquers. If he's in charge, then there will be no wars. Not to dive too much into the story aspect of the game, but it would have been cool to see what Adam's childhood was actually like. Perhaps he did experience a lot of war and saw the destruction it caused. This could have very well led to a desire to never see that kind of suffering repeated, at any cost. To me, this would be something that might stir up feelings of empathy for him, because he's just a scared child deep down, fighting to make the pain go away. How much more of a complicated villain would he be if we were let in on a kind of backstory like that? I felt like Lawndale was such a complicated villain, in that he watched Adam grow up and served under his dad, and he even knew Sir Sloan, which speaks to the interconnectedness of this game, by the way. He reluctantly decided to serve under Adam's leadership, but it's hinted that this was only to keep an eye on Adam and to be an agent of change from within. You can totally see that when he spares the King of Halcyonia's life and when he bargains for the lives of his men after Holograd is defeated. You even see him later in the game paying his respects to Sir Sloan, and once Lonsdale makes it to Sir Sloan's grave, he's always there for the remainder of the game, possibly reflecting on the choices he has made, contemplating how his friend lived his life for a worthy cause and sacrificed it so the world wouldn't be consumed by darkness. And all this to say, I think some of the villain arcs were done well and provided more depth, while others were lacking. Now, the endgame story was a little rough for me. It was a little deceiving because when I saw how creative they were being with Lady Edna's book and your save files playing a role in advancing the story, I remember thinking, wow, if it's this creative before the final battle, I can't wait to see what they have in store for the end. Unfortunately, the end felt kind of lacking. I don't quite know how to feel about it. I'll just come out and say that I felt there was little to no closure for Adele with Edna, nor the woman who became the Knight's Nexus. I mean, who was she even? To be clear, I didn't encounter many details in my playthrough, but looking online, I did learn of a theory that the woman who became the Knight's Nexus was an ancestor of Gloria's, which would explain why it's the Musin lineage that is tasked with sealing away the Knight's Nexus every time the crystals run low on power. I even learned that Seth in his previous life was the Knight's Nexus's lover, who died or was killed by the Knight's Nexus as she sank into madness in the pursuit of knowledge. All this would have been fantastic to know at some point in the game. This is a trope for sure, but in JRPGs sometimes after you defeat the big boss, they revert to their original uncorrupted form and speak to you for a brief moment before they fade away or something. Imagine how much more satisfying of an ending it would be if you saw the spirit of Aileen, the Queen of the Fairies, talking to the spirit of the Knight's Nexus, uncorrupted as a human, as she begs the Queen of the Fairies for forgiveness for all that she's caused. Imagine Edna's spirit explaining who the heck hurt her so badly that she had to go and awaken the Knight's Nexus early and give away asterisks like they were tickets to a Nickelback concert. There was unfortunately none of that in my playthrough. I don't know, maybe I missed something. But instead of all that, the Knight's Nexus shrinks away and our characters are like, I think that was it. I was half expecting to hear that annoying warble scream, but then you learn that the land you're on is about to get destroyed, and now usually people you meet along the way on a journey like this, in a game like this, have some way of coming back to play a role in rescuing you. I really expected Gwillem to fly us out of the Isle of Nothingness, but no, the crystal saved us. I'm guessing they had to do something like this so that they could all be, like, returned home, which can then serve as an excuse to remove Seth and give us a momentary sense of sadness. So with all this being said, I did truly enjoy the game a lot. It's a shame when elements of a story fall apart towards the end, but I guess it's kind of like that in real life. Lots of times we only get parts of a story, so we're left wondering the rest. I think that's why this is a creative choice that gets made in storytelling. It's just that it didn't feel all that intentional in this game, almost like they forgot. I'm seriously thinking that there might be yet another story ending that I may have missed. Despite the way the story ended, I feel like the journey made up for it, and I would absolutely play this game again and would recommend it to friends who like JRPGs. The art style, music, game mechanics, and characters, both main ones and the NPCs, all came together to create a beautiful world that is charming and a joy to navigate. The characters are memorable, the best part of the game in my opinion, and you'll find yourself rooting for the main party along the whole way. Remember the final battle with the Knight's Nexus, where you as the main character are the only one who remembers who they are and needs to remind the rest of the party who they are? Isn't it kind of interesting that everything Seth says are details that we as the player come to learn and love about each character? As I reflect on this game, it kind of feels like I'm in that position, saying, Adele, you're the spunky main physical attacker who crits really hard while pulling off every outfit in this game. Gloria, you're the sweet and determined healer who keeps the party alive. Elvis, I love imitating your accent and I love the versatility you bring to the team with your backup heals and powerful singing buffs. It's corny, I know, but this is precisely why I enjoy this genre of games. It's often not about the ending, but about the journey and characters, exploring a world different than your own and getting lost in the magic. Anyway, 8 out of 10, I would play again. Bye! Just kidding. I just want to end by saying thank you to everyone who stuck around for the ride. I hope you enjoyed the game as much as I did. Thank you for the likes and for your comments. With our second baby almost here, I may not have time to do another playthrough unless it's a short one. We'll see. Well, I've been Mikey and I'm signing out to close the last episode of my playthrough of Bravely Default 2. Take care. Whoa, wait a minute. I completely forgot to say something about B&D. How typical that I forget about that minigame. Here's the thing, as I said during the playthrough, I struggled real hard in Final Fantasy IX's Tetramaster when I was a kid, so attempting another Square Enix card minigame was really scary for me, but I was pleasantly surprised by how accessible it was. I wish I'd have done more collecting and would have reached a higher rank, but I think I had a pretty good strategy for where I was in my progress, which let me take down pretty much any opponent. However, I do feel like I barely scratched the surface of the game, and that playing with additional rules like wraparound and first past the post, and whatever other rules you could unlock in the future, would have made the minigame quite challenging and fun. Not to mention the fact that higher rank NPCs get stronger cards and probably play better. Whenever the next time I revisit this game is, I'll be sure to delve deeper into B&D, now that I've sort of conquered my fear. All in all, I had fun with it, and the rules were explained much better here than in Tetramaster, definitely not as vague. The art on the cards was cool, as was the decision to have character job classes as cards. I don't think there were weapon cards, which sometimes appear in RPG card games. Anyway, now I think we're done. Goodbye!